You're listening to the official podcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles, a community of individuals and families connecting with God to change the world.
Today is something of an invitation. And my heart for us is that, we could create some space in our minds, our schedules, our hearts to not only hear that invitation, because that takes a little bit, like am I open to something, but to give it some real thought. And the invitation is to this, an invitation to see in our hearts the next 40 days as being a time of seeking to draw a little closer and open up a little more of ourselves to God. And let me explain that. Tomorrow, Monday, begins 40 days, the final 40 days, before we engage the greatest act of love that has ever been made. Because tomorrow is 40 days before Good Friday, the celebration that we take up in kind of our annual rhythm in humanity of God coming and giving himself sacrificially for us. And it is quite a profound act. I mean, I was thinking earlier about how, my parents each passed about 3 years ago, a little more, and every year I think of it on that day, because I go back and I think on their birthdays and that, how much they sacrificed for me. And it affects me to think of how much they gave of themselves. I feel blessed, I feel filled, I also feel rooted, and how much more when I think of the fact that the creator of the universe, to whom I've defied, came and was crucified for me as he came and was incarnate in Christ. That's just incredible for me to take in. And so it's something we need to do regularly, but I want to invite us to think how to do that now in these 40 days. Because there can be an incredible act that we just don't create enough space to take it in. And so Lent, as it's traditionally referred to this season, is really creating space to take in this incredible act, this remarkable act, and what it means to us. When God says remember something, he doesn't mean just try to put it on the calendar and cognitively remember it. When he says don't forget, he's not saying literally don't just mentally forget. He's saying don't ever let your life be the same because of this. That's why he says remember this. Your life should be different. And that's what we're saying Lent is. It's opening that up. And so it's been fitting, I think, that we would have launched this series and a season through this time in which we're entitling Closer, Developing a Life with God. Now, I know that when some of us think getting closer to God, there may be a fear for some, like, oh, if I get closer to God, then it means I become more of a religious fanatic. I don't want to get too close to God, because then I'll become like one of those weird people. And no one wants to be weird. I hope you don't get weird. What I hope you and I understand is that getting closer to God is not what makes us weird. I think if we look at Jesus, we begin to understand that Jesus understood the difference between actually getting more connected and centered in God and getting centered in religion. And that actually it's the former that saves us from the latter. He looked at religious people who were living themselves outwardly and getting connected to issues of power and issues of identity out there publicly. And he's saying, no, the way to not become like that is the way to become more centered in God. And his followers saw that in him. They clearly said, you're not like the religious leaders. You're so connected to your Father and to God as your Father in heaven. You're inviting us into something different. And you're so centered in that. And that's our calling. That's his calling to you and I, is to become ever more deeply centered and satisfied in God. And so when his closest disciples, his followers, they saw that difference, at one point they finally say to him, we want that. Help us to know how to have that life that is so connected that, as I would say, Jesus is the only guy in the room who really knows who he is. It's like everybody else, all of us are just trying to figure out who we are, and Jesus says, I can tell you who you are, but you've got to choose that. And so they come to him and they said, Lord, teach us to pray. Teach us to have that kind of connection. And some of you are familiar with his response to that. You can follow with me in Matthew 6, where Jesus says this. So he starts telling them about connecting to God in prayer and that life. And he says, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. In other words, this has become an external life. And we all know that can be kind of a vulnerability. He says, he goes on to say, I tell you the truth, they've received their reward in full. If what you want is just to kind of have this identity and feel good on the outside, that's what you'll get. But that's all you're going to get. He goes on, but when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you notice, one of the things that we might pass over in these words is he doesn't begin by saying, if you pray, if that's something you think might be something you want to add to your life. He says, when you pray. For Jesus, it's very clear that there is no kind of optional personal life to have with God. It is everything. Your personal time connection with God is everything. You need to learn how to cry out like a baby who knows how to just find that deep place in themselves. Could you cue that up again? No. Who needs to cue up? From Jesus' point of view, there is no, we create if. We think that somehow we can actually have something called a life with God without actually personally. That's not even in Jesus' mindset. He's saying when you do this, you have to have that. And you can, if you create an external life, you'll be just like the hypocrites. They live this out. They know how to do that, but it means nothing personally. And you and I should be challenged by that because it means that we can all learn how for an hour and a half to kind of just, I guess this is what it means that I have a life with God. It's how I behave for this. We can learn how to do that for an hour and a half. And then we think, so then the rest, I leave and it's like, where's this connection? Was it just something I kind of figured out how to do for a little bit? It's not so different. Jesus is saying, look, for you, there's got to be this movement into this type of life where you do what? You enter into your room, a space that's secret and personal, and you close the door. And with that, Jesus is saying there needs to be a time of life focused with God, between you as an individual, you personally focused with God. For him, that means everything. It meant everything to him, and it means and should mean everything to us. Something that is focused. And we all know something about trying to relate to one when there is no focus. You ever had a conversation with somebody and either you are having a hard time focusing on them and you're realizing this isn't working. Or maybe you realize they're having a hard time focusing. They just seem to not be there and you're like, there's no connect here. They're just, disconnected. I know, come on, women. You know that men pretty much have, you all know that you say like men, we're like inferior when it comes to focus, right? And we never seem to be kind of able to tune in so easily. My wife says that I have man eyes. Man eyes are those eyes that open the refrigerator and say, where's the ketchup? And my wife says, keep looking. Where is it? Right in front of you. Oh. Somehow we just struggle to focus. Focus is everything. Focus really leads to satisfaction. If you have a conversation and there's no focus, there's no satisfaction. And Jesus is making it very clear. Focus is a huge part of having anything satisfying going on. But notice what he goes on to say. So pray to your Father who is unseen. And that's where if we kind of step back, we're like, yeah, I feel a little challenged to that. Why? Because when I think of focus, what do you think of? We think of focus as our eyes being able to see. That's how I bring focus. Or my ears need to tune in to what I'm audibly hearing. And I need to be able to touch. And so we naturally think, okay, that's a little challenge. He's saying, go focus on what is unseen. And that might strike us. And we might think, as I think many of us do, that I wish that I could connect to God the way that I maybe connect to somebody, like a friend who I can see their face and their physicality, and I can hear their voice like I'd hear a friend, and I can touch them and be that kind of connected to them. And I understand that, and I think that's part of why we might feel challenged. And I think that what comes from that is that you and I tend to think what's physical is really real, and there's a spiritual realm out there, and I'm game for that, but it's kind of a secondary realm. It's not really as solid as the physical realm. And it's one that if we want to, we can explore. It's an optional realm or sphere to explore. And I think that is where we have to stop and say, is that really the case? Or might God be looking at us and saying, where did you come up with that? Why are you so enamored and addicted with your physicality that you think that is what's more real? You see, the truth is that the scriptures are so clear. What is eternal is spiritual. And we're told how God is spiritual, and we relate to him as spiritual beings. So God speaks into us, says, no, let me help you understand. You were just dust till I breathed into you my spirit. You became a living being because you are a spiritual being. And as a spiritual being, your relationship to God is spiritual, but it's not less real. Oh no, it is more real. Listen to what Jesus said in John 4 when he says, God is spirit, so those who worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. You have to engage in that way. I like how Eugene Peterson, in his paraphrased version of the Bible, The Message, says it this way. He says, God is sheer being itself. Sheer being, the most pure being, which is spirit. Those who worship him must do it out of their very being, their spirits, their true selves in adoration. Jesus is declaring to us that not only is God spirit, but our deepest connection to him is spiritual. And we need to start to grasp that, I think, more and more. The truth is, if I reflect on that, I can see someone and not really see them. Isn't that true? You can see someone physically, but never really see them. You have had people who have seen you physically, but never really seen you. And Jesus knew this very well. He had people who were close to him and physically close to him, but they couldn't really get his heart, and they never knew his heart. And maybe you've had that experience. The truth is, there is more to who we are, our deepest and truest sense, that is a spiritual being. And it cannot be contained or confined or controlled by your physicality. We think we know each other because it helps us to see each other physically, but does it really? Do we really see each other most clearly when we see each other only as physical beings? The truth is, spiritual connection is even more real and greater in many regards. And I would suggest these things. One, spiritual connection is transcendent. I love that word. Use it a lot. Kind of a big, cool word. But transcendent means, transcendent means, really, it is beyond the boundaries of human limitations to grasp. It is beyond those kind of boundaries that we typically tie in with our experience of something. And that means it's beyond the limits of language. It's beyond the limits of words, because the truth is, words are just an extrapolation of reality. We think words are the real thing, right? Are they really the real thing? They're just symbols of something that they cannot contain in themselves. No language can perfectly contain its reality. There is something bigger. There is something bigger than our words. There's something deeper to truth and reality than the things that we allow to contain it. And this is what it's pointing to. It's not suggesting, by saying transcendent, that spiritual reality is anti-rational. No, it's not anti-rational. Nowhere does God say the way to become spiritual is to empty your mind and find this mysterious realm that has no connection to the mind. That's not really what God says. There is a connection, but it's not bound by our mere symbols that are physical or language. It transcends those things. It transcends them. Listen to the words that Paul says in 1 Corinthians. They're quite profound, I think, and they help to open our own minds up. He writes in 1 Corinthians 2, he says, as Scripture says, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has imagined the things that God has prepared for those who love him. Why? Because it's beyond us. You cannot grasp the infinite and the perfect, because you're neither infinite or perfect. We're finite and imperfect. We cannot grasp all of the greatness and goodness of God. You can't, he says. But God has revealed those things to us by his what? By his Spirit. The Spirit, he explains, searches everything, especially the deep things of God. After all, who knows everything about a person except that person's own spirit? You cannot be defined merely by your body. There is a you that is not limited or defined by your body. Do you understand that? There is a you that is spiritual, that is not bound merely by your body. In the same way, no one who has known everything about God except the Spirit, no one knows everything about God except God's Spirit. It is that connection then from our spirit in all of its trueness to God's Spirit in all of its power. This is what makes spiritual connection so much greater and transcendent. And it also leads to the second point, that spiritual connection is actually more intimate. It's actually the greater place of connection. We think of intimacy in physical ways. So we think that communication is all about words and intimacy is all about sex or some kind of physical connection. But intimacy is not how close we are to another person. Intimacy is not that way. You can be physically close to someone and not at all be really, truly connected to them. Let me ask you this. Who do you sense you're truly closer to? Someone who might be next to you, not right now, but just in some kind, next to you, who doesn't get you at all, doesn't know anything about you, doesn't know your heart. Or someone who's not in this room right now, who you go, they know me. Like they really get my heart. They're the person in this world that most gets my heart. Who do you feel closer to? It's the person you go, there's someone in this world, I may not see them right now, but they get my heart. Physical proximity is not really what brings intimacy. It is that deeper connection. And so it is with God. He knows you in a way no one knows you. And the physicality or physical proximity that we get so connected to, it comes spiritually. And thirdly, spiritual connection is ultimately more accessible as well. There's nothing limited to location or our senses or visual setting. So oftentimes we think, I want to be close, but I need someone who's here right now in my presence, who's close to me. But the truth is, no one's going to be physically close to us in all of those contexts or settings, but God is. Because he's not limited or bound by that physicality. He is present everywhere. He's present in places that we get surprised by. Many of us in this room, I think, would say, gosh, I've had some times where, on one hand, I just feel like I can't really find God. I'm not sure. And I've had times where, wow, to my surprise, God showed up and met me in ways I didn't anticipate. He met me in places I couldn't even have expected. And I'm really thankful he did. And the thing is, he's not bound. Wherever you are, it says that God's presence is there and able to meet you. And that's good news to us. Because we all need someone who's with us all the time. And that spiritual connection is what we have with God anywhere and everywhere that we can be. And for us, it's like then learning then, how do I kind of tune into this? How do I connect spiritually? Because it's kind of like radio waves. There's radio waves that neither you or I see right now that are running through this room. Why don't you hear them? Because you don't have that. That's not part of who you are to be able to pick up like an antenna all of those radio waves. They exist. They're very real, by the way. They're as real as you are. They're as real as, but I don't see them. They're as real as you are. And you probably accept that. The same things are the things of the Spirit. But we are spiritual beings, so we have the ability to bring ourselves to engage a spiritual God, spirit to spirit. But how do we do that? Well, let me suggest a few things, and I want to make this, when it closes, making this practical as we move forward in getting closer to God and taking up the season. The first is this, that we can focus our souls on our life with God as we become intentional. As we just become intentional. I know that seems kind of obvious, but it's probably the most challenging part for some of us. The simple truth is that connection involves intention. If you want to be connected at some level, you have to intend to be connected. It just doesn't happen. Or you can pass by somebody, you can have your back to them, but you're not going to be connected until you turn and you choose to be connected. My wife and I know that we can be actively in the same house and doing various things, but unless we say, let's take time every evening or during the day by phone, that we connect, unless we're intentional, it just doesn't happen. It's not handed to us. Connection with God is not handed to you. It's a relationship. Relationships involve intention. That may be the most important thing that we kind of recognize. And we recognize, too, that, as my wife and I have found, staying connected involves staying current. It involves staying current. Because the truth is, if we go many, many days without sharing what's going on, what happens? We're actually growing distance because why? More and more of what I experience is now not something I've connected with her. More of what she's experienced is not connecting with me. So the longer we go without sharing and connecting, the further apart we get. The great value is in trying to stay current, like, hey, this is what's going on, this is what I'm navigating now, this is what went on today, and that is vital to us. And this is why I believe you and I should take in how good it is to gather in this weekly gathering. Because at some level, coming communally together to meet with God, I think, is a vital rhythm in our lives. Because it's in gathering together that at least every week, I gather with you and I center myself again in who I am. I center myself in God. And I may not feel like doing that. You may not feel like doing it. But just like everything else, you do it and you realize without it, just like any relationship, it'll grow distant. And I will start to become whatever this world tells me I am on Monday morning. I need to come back and center myself in who I am. And this is what Jesus understood. You have to come back and continually do that. But the communal gathering is kind of like an entryway into life with God. It's that where you kind of step in with the community, and then the question is, what do you do from there? Because while it's good and while it centers me, I need to then take it into the week, or else it just becomes this huge distance the rest of the week. So how do I keep that connection? It's kind of like having a work party where the team, or a working team meeting at your workplace with the boss. And everybody goes, yeah, together we're in this, we met with the boss, that's great. But what do you do the rest of the week? After the team work meeting, you go off and do your stuff as directed by the boss. So we each have to go on from this to carry it out in our weeks, and that takes that keeping that connection going. So we're thinking, how do I move that into the week place? And the challenge that many of us feel is, as soon as that 2 hours, I got that one down. I set apart a couple hours on Sundays. But after that, I just feel you fill in the blank. But for most people, too busy. I just feel too busy. I mean, I get up and I'm always in a rush. I'm always behind. It seems like I can never get that time. And I think we live, obviously, extremely busy lives, and it is really, really hard in ways. But I think probably if we reflect, the issue is not really busyness. Or to state it this way, perhaps a little bit more directly, the challenges of developing life with God is not as much a matter of busyness as it's a matter of priority and a pattern of life. Because the truth is, the more I try to think, is it really, could I take some busyness out and think that I'm going to have this great time with God? 5 minutes in the morning would change a lot of our lives. 5 minutes in the morning would change a lot of our lives. When you get down to that, I don't think busyness is the problem. I think, I need to get up a little early. Yeah, there's a little bit there to probably do. But the amazing thing is, I can always create rush. I create rush. All I do is just schedule out other stuff, don't leave enough time. And then I'm getting up and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I've got to get up and change clothes, take a shower, make the bed, do these things. And each one of them 10 minutes. They are obviously going to get done. And I just didn't leave enough time for the others, so I'm in a rush. But what is a rush? A rush is a matter of what you decided you didn't and did need to do. That's all the rush is. We create it. It's not really forced upon us. It created us, especially when you start thinking, if I even had, again, let's say 10 minutes in the morning with God, and maybe other times of the day, that I could just center myself. What a difference, it would make. And I think we need to start to face that. And I know that for a lot of us, it's the hardest thing is to create habits, to change these patterns. Because once we create patterns, it's easy to flow in them. But without them, it's very hard to create them and push through them. And the truth is that habits we need a heart to motivate our habits, but our habits also motivate our heart. Once we create them, we can start to find that our heart's motivated by them. And we think, I just can't stay connected. I can't imagine ever being able to stay very connected with God. It's so hard. I'm so scatterbrained. I could never have a regular connection. How could that be possible to be connected to something? How is it possible that anything I would ever be really connected with 24/7, that's absolutely unimaginable that something could have that effect on my life? Oh, wow. At least every waking hour, this probably does for a lot of us. It beeps, you jump. It tells you everything about what you should be doing, and you use it for that. When I was a little kid, just to age myself, it used to be a thing. This was a thing. It was called a phone. It's connected to a wall, and it didn't have quite that control. It's not a thing anymore. Now it's like the connection. It's like it lives, and you live in relationship to it. I wonder how we could shift this connection to a connection with God, or even use this connection as a connection with God. I know that I have to sometimes start putting in, things into a calendar, and it puts an alert. What would it be like if you put an alert that just said God? And you put it in at morning, 9 a.m., noon, 3 p.m., 9 p.m., and it just said God. I want to encourage you to think about for the next 40 days, however it works for you, because we're not trying to lay a trip, we're just trying to say, how is it that maybe we need to be intentional? And maybe it starts with just breaking and changing a habit, creating a reminder that says, at that moment, when that goes off, I don't need to go off for 30 minutes. I'll take 30 seconds and just center myself back in who I am. And I'll continue my day with that kind of a reminder. Maybe you just do it in the morning. Maybe you do it through the day. But we need to somehow build that. Secondly, along with being intentional, I believe we can do this as we set ourselves apart from other focuses. This kind of goes with it. But any relationship that's trying to say, I want to come together, realizes it also has to kind of set itself and create not just time, but space. So my wife and I have to kind of create a time where we're not involved with our kids, and we have to say, let's go over here and at this time, and that is turning away from other things. And this is clearly what Jesus did. He built this as a life, and it's possible. So Jesus is living with these guys. They're traveling, and they're probably always sleeping in one kind of room where everybody's on a mat. And you know what? If you wake up in the morning and you got everyone else going to wake up in the same room, they're going to start chatting and preparing things for the day, and others have risen. You're not going to be very focused. You're not going to get much space. You're not going to have that intent. So this is why Jesus got up early in the morning, and it says he went out to a solitary place or space, because he knew that there he would have that. And there they kept finding him. And they're like, why are you not with us? You can imagine they're feeling like a little abandoned. And he was like, because I needed to be with my Father. Oh, okay. And that's part of what we need to do. Now, that's hard because for some of us, we feel sometimes there's all these other interruptions and we're not sure where to draw the line. This isn't about being rigid. Jesus wasn't rigid. Jesus had times where there were interruptions that he deemed to be what God would want him to do. His Father in heaven would say, be involved in that. But there were some that were not. And there were some interruptions just to simply step out of. The truth is there are some interruptions in our lives that are really nothing more than something not that important, waving its arms saying, look how important I am. Look how important I am. Oh, there's a news thing coming on. Look how important I am. There's something new that I could go buy. Look how important I am. There's something you didn't get at the market. Look how important I am. There's a friend who you might want to check in with. Look how important. All these things are declaring their importance beyond their real importance. And so part of knowing somebody is learning how to not let the deceptive drama of the urgent steal away what's important. There's always going to be a part of that. I like this phrase, that sometimes knowing, in this case God, involves knowing, being able to say no. You can never say yes to something if you don't learn to also say no to something. And you have to discern that. But a lot of us need to realize what we're addicted to is false importance. And we kind of have to confront that. Because I know for myself, if I stop and say, what is it that's got my attention? Oh, it's fascinating. It doesn't really seem that important when I face it. It's not going to change in 10 minutes. I didn't need to know that information in 10 minutes. I didn't need to return the call. I didn't need to. We just need to create space for how important it is. And thirdly, we need to allow our minds and hearts to focus on what God has made known in creation, which in theological terms is often referred to as general revelation, meaning what God's just created in the universe. And secondly, His Word, which theologically is referred to as special revelation because it even goes beyond that. So just to kind of put it in these terms, yes, God is spirit, and we don't see Him physically because He is beyond that. He's transcendent, He's eternal. But He has revealed something into the physical realm in the way that He's created the whole cosmos. There's something remarkable in that. And then, knowing that it's a little darkened and dim for us to understand because of our own hearts, He then breaks in and begins to speak through His Word, which is there in Scripture to us. So these two parts each can play a role in how we bring our focus. And so one of them is creation itself. We can look at creation and go, wow, there's something of God in that. This is what the psalmist says, and we read in Psalm 19. It says, the heavens proclaim, it's a beautiful statement, the heavens proclaim, declare, reveal the glory, that is the goodness of God. And it doesn't mean the heavens eternal, it means the heavenly realm, the skies. That's why it goes on to say, the skies display His craftsmanship. Do you want to know something about the Creator? Look at the craftsmanship. Look at there's something there. Yeah, it's just amazing. Like there's beauty in that. And we go on in Romans where it says so pointedly, as Paul's looking at the role of creation, he says, from the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, there are qualities that you otherwise would not see, His eternal power and divine nature have now been clearly observed in what He made. So there's things of God's power, His vastness, His beauty, His goodness that you can look at and see in creation itself. That is something to take in and ponder. And then again, He goes beyond that and He begins to speak into humanity and says, now this I will make myself known. Here is who I am. Let me tell you. Let me get you clear on things. And that's what the Word of God is. It is living. So the Scriptures to us are not only God inspiring them, but illuminating them, His Spirit working to speak to us. And many of us have experienced this. And next week we're going to look a little bit more at how the Scriptures can speak alive to us, speak personally to us. But here we see we can look at these two things, and that when we do, number 4, in that process, we redirect our focus from our nature and limited position to that of God's nature and unlimited position. The reason I try to make this strange term is because I want us to understand that we're never really going to rightly focus on God if we don't understand that at the core something should happen when I, finite, bring myself before the infinite. If there is not a difference that makes, something's kind of wrong. And here's what I think we tend to do a lot. We think of connecting with God mostly out of, I have problems. I've got some things I can't figure out. God, what do you, I mean, God, do you get this? I need you to get this, God. I need you to get how big of a problem this is. And I need you to get to the fact that my kids this, I don't have kids this, I'm not married. I need you to get this. And God's heart is to definitely come and bring those things and cast them on him. That's right. But there's something about the way we do that a lot of times, the real center of that whole exchange is the problem. It's the thing most real to us. I don't really care if God does anything. I don't even really care about God. I just want to know if he gets how big my problem is. So we're all about convincing that the problem is too big. And so we're living we're really focused and centered really in just staying in the place of our limited perspective and our limited power, and so the problem is just so great. I sure hope God gets it. That's the way we often live. And so when we leave prayer going, I don't know, I hope he got it, that is not exactly the kind of focus that I think gets it, because it means I never really met with God. I just hoped he showed up and was kind of glancing down on my problem. That's the way it can be. Something should happen when I am saying, I am coming before he who is truly good, who is truly infinite, and I am bringing stuff to bear on him. And by the way, that's not to downplay our problems at all. And I think we need to. He says, cast your cares on me. But I don't think we really do cast our cares. I think we just present them, and then we take them with us, and we leave with them. I'm being honest. What's more real to you after you've prayed, the problem or God? I think a lot of times it's still the problem. It's just more real. And God isn't saying invalidate it. God's not saying throw it out there and act like you don't have a problem. Not at all. Never. But it's really, there's something has to happen inside of us. And this is what I want to help us to see. That we need to change that. That when we bring our woes and wills, we're bringing them before something that is bigger than our woes and our wills. And I think we've got to say, look, I'm bringing my little woes and wills to you who is greater. And what he wants us to see, I'm going to close putting this before you. There's many aspects of himself, but here's just four that if we look at creation and we look at the scriptures, that I hope we grow at when we focus on God. Number one, his great and tremendous nature. That there is something so vast about God. He's eternal. He's all-powerful. We should get that. We should be looking at that. Take a little time to just focus on how vast God is, how big he is, how much bigger than you he is, how much bigger than your problem he is. Doesn't mean it answers everything, but at least you know who it is that is going to be engaged in this. Number two, his caring provision. Sometimes we're like, God, like I just need you to do, I need something good. I just want to see if you care for me. And like I don't have anything. Really? You breathing right now? Yeah, I guess I am. That's probably pretty good. Yeah. But I need more food. Did you have anything to eat? Yeah. That's who we're at. We are just, sometimes we're like the whiny kids. Like, you're not aware of anything good in this world? Like there's beauty. There's provision. There is great. We need to bring to God our needs for provision, but we need to stop and realize, have I understood that actually behind the universe is a caring provider? And there's another one who wants to destroy me, so I need to bring my needs to God. You get it. But have we even stopped and realized there is a caring provider? There's breath, there's plenishment that comes from the ground, there's a whole lot of other things that provide for us, that the universe and creation declares that, and we experience it. Yeah, take that. Oh, yeah, I guess there are some things. I guess there's goodness behind it. And that leads to the third part, God's goodness itself, that there's beauty, that there's justice. We say, oh, the world's so ugly. Yeah, there's a lot of ugliness. But why are you calling it ugly? What does ugly mean? It means it's what? Not beautiful. Where did you get the idea of beauty? Because there's beautiful stuff in this world. And so we're complaining about ugliness, not realizing the reason we want to fight ugliness and what we might deem ugly is because there is beauty, and that beauty says something about God or justice. Things are not fair. They're not fair. And why do we want to say they're not fair? Well, because I think there's fairness. Where'd you get that idea? Well, because I sense that the world was created to be just and fair. That's God. The whole universe. calls out for justice and fairness, that nobody should be left out, that nobody should be treated unequally. And that's vital. But that means we need to look to the God who does bring about justice, who has sought a world of fairness, before we just let ourselves get consumed by what's not fair. Does that make sense? We need to look at God and open ourselves up to what's bigger. And finally, to his love and mercy. To realize that there is a love behind the universe, that God, Father, Son, and Spirit is eternal, and that eternal community in the heavens is saying, this is how you are meant to live. You are meant to live in relationship to this sacrificial love between Father, Son, and Spirit, who honor each other, who sacrifice for each other. This is the life that you are meant to know. And it's there. And it's there to meet you. Oh, but I'm not as good at it. Yes, and it meets you not only in love, but in mercy. It meets you right where you are, and that is so vital for you and I to see. As the writer of Lamentations says, this I call to mind. Notice what he said. I call it to mind. I focus my soul. It is within my need to do so. I have to focus my soul. So I call this to mind. And what does he call to mind? I call this to mind, and therefore it leads to hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. Well, that would mean it's going on right now. Yeah. That would mean it's going on tomorrow morning when I get up. The steadfast love of God is there tomorrow morning when you wake up. His mercies, they never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I don't know about you. I need to go back and put my mind in that reality every day. And then I live out of one who is loved and able to love others, because eternity is seeking to bring that love to bear. And I want to invite us as we go into these next 40 days, I want to invite you to consider that it's an opportunity to engage the greatest love that's ever been enacted. And it's been acted for you, and to give space to that, to dare to want to engage being closer to God. And it doesn't involve as much huge amounts of change in your life as it does intent. It involves us recognizing that there is something more at hand. If you and I think, oh, I should spend more time in prayer because I don't know, that's what I'm supposed to do, it would be a good religious duty to fulfill. You don't get it, and I don't get it. Well, maybe I should do it because somebody wants me to. We don't get it. See, for Jesus, he didn't do it because of what others expected. He did it purely out of his need to know that he was going to live out of a centered identity. He was not going to let others name him and claim him, and neither are you. And if you care not to let everything else in your life tell you who you are and name you and claim you, including yourself, you will want to go and stay in that place in which you are centered in what God has to say and in that relationship. It is the only thing that truly gives us life. Now, we have this thing called life here. If you want it, great. But if life as the world is going to give it to you is not satisfying, and you realize you need life that comes from God, you're going to seek it out. I think Jesus understands what our souls understand. We are suffocating and we're on the edge of consciousness. If your soul could speak to you clearly and you could hear it, I think our souls would say to you, understand, I am suffocating. Please get oxygen. Because I'm on the edge of consciousness. You barely even know who you are. You're on the edge of it. Please get oxygen. That's the kind of hunger we need to know, where we go, wow, I do. I need to get up and get a little oxygen because I am a little woozy. That is the heart that God has for us. Come, get oxygen for your soul. That's what time with me is about. And I want to invite us to close in something that might be, you can decide if this is helpful to you, explore as you maybe wake up tomorrow. But I think we can simplify it to even just two phrases, 2 5-word phrases, that if we just let that be a part of our morning, take 5 minutes, 10 at the most. And do that maybe more times of the day if you want. And just sit and focus on these 2 phrases, these simple prayers, if you will. I think it would deeply help us. And they are this. One is, God, I belong to you. And the second, may your will become mine. Two very simple phrases, but they kind of reroute ourselves in that life. I want to invite us, as we close in worship, I want to invite you to just join me in just a moment of just taking that as a, kind of like we'll just exercise that. Something that you might do tomorrow morning or later today, and do this many a times. But I want to invite you to join me by just physically centering down for a minute. I'm going to invite you, if you're sitting, to maybe put your feet just on the floor. Relax your body for a minute, and I'm going to invite you to close your eyes. A lot of us have a lot of things running through our mind. What we're going to do this afternoon, what we're going to do now, things this week, whatever it might be. But whatever tends to kind of be the most consuming and get the most of you, I just want to invite you to take a moment and just start to let that kind of exhale for a minute. Just relax and kind of feel yourself exhaling things that are not fault, but they're not what you want to dictate your insides, your internal reality, your spiritual understanding. So just exhale them for a minute. And now I invite you to, in your own heart, not needing to do this aloud in this context, but just to pray the first of those two lines in your heart, and kind of let this be like inhaling this reality. God, I belong to you. Just pray that to yourself. Over and over. God, I belong to you. And to whatever degree you can authentically do this, or even you're just going to be honest in your heart, that God knows that we're not all pure and simple in all of our understanding and motives, so maybe you're still struggling to believe, so you can be honest with God about it. But I invite you to take up the second line. May your will become mine. May your will become mine. God, long ago we were reminded that when eternity was at a crossroads, one night, Jesus, you said, not my will, but yours be done. And with that, you gave yourself as a sacrifice for us. And you knew that you were heavy of heart. You were sweating blood because you were going to bear all of our separation, all of condemnation, all of the shame of our kind of defiance. And you gave up your will for us. And you followed the Father, and we thank you for it, and we pray that you might fill our hearts more and more to become more like you with our wills and just with our heart to love the Father and to love you, Jesus, and to join that love that will last forever. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for listening to the official broadcast of the Westside Vineyard in Los Angeles. Tune in for next week's message.